Let's talk about The Moon Pool and Dwellers in the Mirage by Abraham, or A. Merritt. He was an early sci-fi author, years 1884 to 1943, a very successful journalist, very important journalist in fact, and editor. He also wrote sci-fi, quite early American sci-fi in terms of the tradition there. His first novel, The Moon Pool, is 1919. His last novel, I think, was 1934. This novel, Dwellers in the Mirage, was 1932. And these two are the main entries where he deals with lost worlds. You know, you go through a cave and there's this amazing dinosaur land there, that sort of thing. You see that a little bit in H. Rider Haggard. You see it somewhat with both a bit kind of Tarzan hints at it, but more by Burroughs, the Pellucidar Hollow World stuff. Arthur Conan Doyle, of course, most famously with The Lost World. And these two deal with that. You can see the cover on The Moon Pool. It's a modern edition and describes it as a forerunner to ABC's Lost, which is ambivalent praise depending on what you thought of the last couple of seasons of that. You can see the connections, and the introduction in this book makes a good case for the obvious influence of Merritt on American science fiction. Now, I'm going to kind of do mini reviews of each, a bit more on Dwellers than on Moonfall, and then I'll draw together a point that's in common, which I think is worth talking about. Moonpool is narrated by someone called Professor Goodwin, Dr. Walter T. Goodwin, and he basically bumps into a friend near when he's in Australia, or near Australia rather. I think it's in Port Moresby technically, in Papua New Guinea, and his friend Throckmorton says, "Oh, my expedition has, including my wife, has basically got lost. They've been taken by this strange creature who comes out of the ground on this island in the Pacific, this kind of strange monument, a real life monument, but obviously the details here are fictional." And so yeah, he hears the strange story. He thinks okay, and then Throckmorton doesn't come back. Doesn't manage to complete his return and get in touch with Goodwin. So Goodwin says, "Okay, I promised I'd go and help, so I'll go and help." And he goes on his own, but he gathers bit by bit a kind of peculiar expedition. He gathers a half Irish, half American. So Goodwin is American. He gathers a half Irish, half American Royal Flying Corps pilot called Larry O'Keefe. He gathers a Norseman, a Norwegian guy, a sailor called Olaf Hudrickson, and they bump into, at the place where they're trying to get into the portal, they bump into a Russian, a communist, a Bolshevik, because this is 1919, we're 2 years past the revolution, called Marakinov, and they basically get into through this portal, and they go out and into what turns out to be a lost underground world, Muria, from the legends of Lemuria, the lost continent of the Pacific. And what happens there, how to sum it up? So basically, there's this large city of people who seem to worship the being who has stolen these surface dwellers. And so it's all very beautiful and impressive and lovely, but also dark and twisting. And it turns out from this point it's clear that really Larry O'Keefe is the main character. The O'Keefe of Ireland, this kind of strangely both superstitious, inverted commas, but also scientific man, and he's constantly talking about how leprechauns are talking to him, and but also how you got to, that leprechauns only exist in Ireland, so here you just have to be scientific. Very, very fun stuff on the whole with that. And Olaf is trying to find his family, who've been taken, and Goodwin's trying to find his friend, and Larry is just, he crashed his plane and doesn't want to go back to his ship, to the HMS Dolphin, so he says, "Oh, let me come along, please." And Marakinov is there on a Bolshevik plot, and yeah, they get involved in this strange civilization, which obviously has lots of kind of castes and subtle gradations of society, but also some weird religious things where it seems there might be some forbidden religion. And they get to know Larry and the chief priestess of the Shining One, the dweller in the moon pool, this strange creature who seems to take people. they perhaps begin to fall in love, but Larry's also had visions of another woman, um, and uh, and yeah, so he's kind of caught between that, and there are lots of wonderful other inventions. There's frogmen and strange plants and weird bits of technology, some of which, particularly strange plant technologies, and there are kind of fun explanations of how things work, the mystery of what's happened, and why this is here, and where it's come from. That's all set up well and revealed well. I really enjoyed it. So the mystery of what this lost land under the earth is genuinely very successful, and I would praise that. On the other hand, Lovecraft said of the sequel technically to the Moonpool, because it has Goodwin in it too, was the Bikeable, the Metal Monster. In that one, you have he says, the human characters are wooden and irrelevant, but the phenomena he calls it, the invention is incredible. And I don't think I'd say the characters are terrible, but they are fairly limited. So there's a couple of genuinely funny exchanges. Larry and Goodwin's friendship has its moments. Larry is quite entertaining. Olaf is kind of a wonderful Viking trope, modern day Viking. Goodwin is fine too, as well, I'd say. But lots of the other characters are, feel like first drafts, or they're very naive interpretations of tropes. Not everything. There are a few weird and interesting things in characters who are quite effective. But I think that's right, that this is an early effort. The characters are weak, the invention, the world is strong. On the other hand, Dwellers in the Mirage is better and is much more it's a good chunk better. It's worth consideration kind of separately, I think. And it's got some similar elements. It's got a lost world. People go and end up in a lost kind of land. There is, in the same way, there's a good woman and a bad woman. In the same way that Larry seems to have this evil or priestess of a potentially evil, otherworldly being, but also these visions of another woman who seems much nicer. There's similar things there. There are some similar points of invention and of skill and description. But all of it really is much better accomplished. And so here, I'll read the blurb. Beneath the shimmering surface of a lake cradled in the desolate Alaskan mountains, the people of the shadowed land waited for Dwayanu, the warrior hero who will bring back to the world, the upper world, the worship of Kalkru, the cruel, destructive octopus god whose appetites must be appeased by human sacrifice. There's a Kalkru in a very pulp cover, which is 1974. When Leif Langdon accidentally discovers the people beneath the valley floor, they welcome him as the reincarnation of Dwayanu. Slowly, Langdon's personality is possessed by the pride and bloodlust of his warrior ancestor, until he is driven by forces beyond his understanding or control to serve the evil power of Kalkru. So you'll be right to think of Lovecraft, who really liked Merritt. You'd be right to think of Lost World fiction. But there's a lot more going on here. Partly because, in fact, the blurb doesn't sum up that Leif has already come into contact with the cult of Kalkru before he goes into the Mirage in Alaska. He's in Alaska, about to go try to find the place, and he then gives it in flashback. You hear about a time in Central Asia on an expedition where they met these tribesmen, and they thought Leif was kind of an ancestor kind of type person or a leader of theirs, even though they look very different. And there's a whole thing about. And there's some hints of this as well in the Moonpool, of the idea of the lost descent of different groups of people, of humans. You get it in Robert E. Howard as well, with his legends of the Hyperboreans. And so Leif is recognised, and he comes into contact with the cult of Kalkru there, and the idea that he is Dwayanu, their fabled, prophesied hero. And then he goes, and this takes us back into the present, he goes into the Mirage. A few years later, he goes with his friend Jim. His friend Jim is a Cherokee, and they are looking for this location. They find it in this strange, in a bowl in the ground in Alaska, which is hidden by this peculiar mist. And it's basically a temperate or subtropical rainforest environment. And there's a few things that are interesting here that I'm going to talk about. First, the different peoples of the Mirage. There are kind of what seemed to be a non-human species, perhaps, or at least an incredibly small human group of people. You know, very very tiny, yay high to a grasshopper. But their priestess is a normal-sized human. There's the wicked humans in the sense that they're people who worship Kalkru, and they have a female high, a female. Well, she's not a high priestess. There's a high priest, but a female sort of handmaiden to Kalkru almost, plus warriors and stuff. And there's some very similar character tropes between the two books for that, but much better in Dwellers. And yeah, I enjoyed that. I thought that was great. This city, which actually there are undercurrents and different things going on again, working on tropes that were there in the Moonpool. But does everyone think the same thing about it? What do they want to happen? And there is another human city or a settlement which we know about early on, but which we don't see till later. There is Merritt's invention is again very good. Lots of weird monsters, weird plants. Much less technology than in the Moonpool, which is sci-fi in that direction. It has lots of. There is a scientific set of speculations in this book on the way the weird things happen, the way the fantasy inverted commas is integrated into reality. But compared to the Moonpool, there's much less tech. His friendship with his friend Jim is great. Jim is just it's really fun. I like Jim a lot. Santawi, I think his other name is. He's great. He's entertaining. He's funny. He's brave. He's often cleverer than Jim. Historically, that is interesting because in 1932, I think of the 30s Native Americans. You look at Yak Cannott playing John Wayne's silent sidekick. Good guy, silent, good at carnival tricks in Poverty Row B movies. You really have to wait to something like the film Broken Arrow to begin to see diverse representations of Native Americans. So though it's not new to us now, it is just remarkable to have this book where basically there is a degree of cultural background played up for Jim, but fundamentally he's just an adventurer who is as competent as Leaf in many of the same ways. That was interesting, and I liked their friendship anyway. Their friendship was well realised, much better than O'Keefe and Goodwin's in the Moonpool. And just the weird thing about the fact that this guy Leaf thinks he's Diana, and he's like, but that can't be real. Maybe I've been brainwashed or hypnotized. Maybe I'm deluded. But he doesn't know what's happening. But he has all these memories, and he knows all this stuff, and has this kind of power and the integration. So essentially, there is a psychological horror thing going on, which is completely different to anything you ever see in Lovecraft, and much more subtle. Where suddenly this guy is split between Leaf, who is just a good guy who doesn't like Cthulhu gods, and Dwyanu, who doesn't care about Cthulhu gods on the whole. And even if he's not necessarily a fan of them, but he can live with cruelty. He's from a cruel race. Yeah, it's really fun. I liked it a lot. One thing that links the two, I think, and it's there's a few things going on. It's nested or something like that. There's a confluence of sci-fi and fantasy in these. Sometimes you see these books described as fantasy. I would not. They are sci-fi, and I think that's the usual description, and that's right. But they are also weird fiction. They are parallel to particularly Lovecraft, Kalkru. I mean, come on, it even sounds like Cthulhu, and you just wonder whether or not it was nicked and it's a response to Cthulhu. It actually he plays this up in a surprising way, though, that it's a confluence between sci-fi and fantasy, and in that, on the one hand, both faith and science interact in understanding the events of the story. The different characters who have different core worldviews, one may be more scientific, one may be more happy-go-lucky, one may be more faithful, a person of faith. Whatever it is, and people's views and opinions change as well, but the way they deal in both these books with the world around them is often via these worldviews, and they both have something to offer. And I think that's interesting at a time where scientific, say social Darwinism and Spencerianism is just at its last full flourish. You have sort of scientific racism as the basis of a lot of views we would now identify as racist. You have also, on the other hand, you have not long after the Moonpool, I guess between these two books, you have the Scopes monkey trial. So you have this thing where Merritt is actually he's attempting a fusion, and it is an intentional thing, and it's just very interesting to see and well done. I think at the same time, though, this does not stop this being basically hard sci-fi, much more even than Wells. And Wells is basically a hard sci-fi author, one of the first. Say compared to something like Burroughs, where the Mars books and the Venus books and the Blue Star books and Tarzan are not hard sci-fi. Let's be honest. You know, this is a thing where Merritt quotes Einstein. He talks about relativity. He talks about various archaeological theories for explaining different weird things people have found. You know, how can Cthulhu exist is a question Merritt decides to ask. He's like, let's talk about it. You know, I want to know. What is Kalkru? That's a question that's posed quite early. And much like there is a mystery about the Shining One in the moon pool, I should say also, that's one thing. The solutions to the mysteries are utterly different here. It reminds me certainly of the slightly later author, Lee Brackett, who I've reviewed on this channel, who was very good. She was very good at setting up strange mysteries with really quite wondrous solutions. And these both have a bit of that. We're just bringing in a bit of hard science, bringing in a bit of folklore and mythology, bringing in this and that. He comes up with these excellent solutions to the problems. Merritt is not, he can be as good a creator of the unknown and the unnerving as Lovecraft, though never as good at the horror, I think it's fair to say on the whole. But he gives his characters very different equipment to respond to the things that happen to him. A belief in discovery science, for instance, a belief in spiritual things in folklore. And it's a really important and really fun combination that is not like anything else going at the time. So I think I would say I would recommend. Neither is particularly long. That's 200 pages in a sort of slightly smaller text pulp edition. This one in a slightly larger text is about 280. I would recommend The Dwellers in the Mirage. I wouldn't discommend the moon pool, but I would say I'd offer more guardedness about its value. I am looking forward to reading more of his other works over time. If you've read Merritt, tell me what you think in the comments, and I guess other early hard sci-fi recommendations. Till next time.